Her name was Medusa. But before the serpents, before the stone gaze, before the severed head mounted on a goddess's shield and carried across the ancient world as a weapon and a ward, there was a woman. There was beauty. There was devotion. And there was a terrible injustice that the gods of Olympus chose not to correct. This is not simply the story of a monster. It never was. It is the story of what the ancient world did to the things it could not control, and what happens when legend outlives the cruelty that created it. The world before Zeus, primordial origins. To understand Medusa, you have to understand where she came from, not just geographically, not just culturally, but cosmologically. Because Medusa was not a creature of the familiar Olympian world, the world of Zeus and Hera, of Apollo and Aphrodite, of feasts on Mount Olympus and divine politics conducted across the heavens. Medusa was older than that, far older. Her parents were Phorcys and Ceto, two primordial sea deities who belonged to a generation of divine beings that existed before the Olympians rose to power. Phorcys was the old man of the sea, a god who ruled not the surface of the ocean, but its depths, the darkness below the light, the crushing silence beneath the waves. Ceto was his consort, and her very name meant the deep places, the abyssal waters, the unknowable dark. Together, they were the parents of some of the most terrifying figures in all of Greek myth, the Graeae, the ancient Grey sisters who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them, the Hesperides, the nymphs who tended the garden at the edge of the world, Ladon, the sleepless serpent who coiled around the tree of golden apples, and the Gorgons, three sisters born from the deep, carrying within them something of the ocean's most primal, dangerous nature. Their names were Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. The first two were immortal, eternal, untouchable by time or blade or fate. Medusa alone was mortal, a fact that would define everything that followed. Among three sisters born from the same ancient darkness, she was the only one who could die. That distinction matters. It is woven into every tragedy the myth contains. Ancient scholars, writing in later centuries, Hesiod among them, in his great cosmological poem The Theogony,
placed the Gorgons at the very edge of the known world, near the entrance to the underworld, some said, at the far western boundary of the earth, where the sun sank below the horizon and the living did not travel willingly. They were beings of threshold and boundary, creatures who existed between worlds, neither fully divine nor fully earthly, neither monster nor goddess, but something stranger and older than either category could contain. And Medusa, the youngest and the most mortal among them, was said to be the most beautiful.
A life of devotion. In the ancient sources that describe Medusa's life before her transformation, most notably in Ovid's Metamorphoses, written in the 1st century BCE, which drew on far older traditions, she was not simply beautiful in the way that a flower is beautiful, or the way that a painting is beautiful. She was beautiful in a way that unsettled people, that made them stop, that made men travel great distances, not to worship at Athena's temple, which was its rightful purpose, but simply to stand in the same space as the priestess who served there. Her hair, in particular, was spoken of with something approaching reverence. Ancient sources describe it as magnificent, as a kind of glory, the same word the Greeks used for divine radiance. Some accounts suggest that admirers, overcome by the comparison, would remark that even Athena herself could not claim more beautiful hair, a dangerous thought to speak aloud. In a world where gods were real and listening, comparisons like that were not compliments, they were provocations. Medusa had made a choice in her life that mattered enormously in the ancient world. She had taken a vow of chastity and dedicated herself to the service of Athena, goddess of wisdom, of craft, of war conducted with strategy rather than fury.
Athena was a virgin goddess, and her priestesses were expected to reflect that sacred state. Medusa's devotion was total. When powerful men came to the temple and made their interests known, and some of them were very powerful men indeed, she refused them. She had agency. She had made her choice. Her purity was not simply a rule imposed on her from outside, it was who she was. There is something worth pausing on here. Ancient Greek society did not, as a rule, give women a great deal of agency over their own lives. Medusa, as she is described in the sources, had chosen her path deliberately. She served a goddess, she upheld her vows, she rejected suitors on the grounds of that devotion, not because she had no other options, but because she had made a commitment she intended to keep. The ancient world would not let her keep it.
The god who wanted what was not his. Poseidon noticed her. Poseidon, god of the sea, shaker of the earth, one of the three brothers who divided the world between them after the fall of the Titans. Zeus took the sky, Hades took the underworld, Poseidon took the ocean and everything that lay beneath its surface. He was a god of enormous power and a famously volatile temperament. He held grudges across generations, he flooded cities, he shook the earth when displeased. He was not accustomed to being refused. But Poseidon's interest in Medusa was not, according to many ancient readings of the myth, purely a matter of desire. There was something else at work, something political in the divine sense of the word. Poseidon had a long and bitter rivalry with Athena. The most famous episode of that rivalry concerned the city of Athens itself. Both gods had competed for the honor of being the city's patron deity, each offering a gift to its people. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident and produced a saltwater spring. Powerful, dramatic, but ultimately not very useful to a city that needed fresh water. Athena planted an olive tree. The people chose Athena, and the city took her name. Poseidon never forgot the slight. Medusa served Athena. She lived within Athena's temple. She was, in the complex and layered way that divine politics operated in the ancient world, something that belonged to Athena's domain, which made her, for a god nursing an old wound, something worth taking. She ran. Ancient sources are clear on this. Medusa did not go willingly. She sought sanctuary in the one place that should have been inviolable, the inner chamber of Athena's own temple. Sacred ground, a place where the presence of the goddess was most concentrated, where her protection should have been absolute, where no violation should have been possible. Poseidon violated it anyway. The assault happened inside the temple, in the house of the goddess she served, in the place where Medusa had gone specifically because she believed it would protect her. No protection came.
Athena's response and what it reveals. What happened next is one of the most debated and most disturbing moments in all of Greek mythology, not because it is violent, but because of what it tells us about how the ancient world understood justice, power, and the relationship between the divine and the human. When Athena returned to her temple and discovered what had happened, her response was rage. Not at Poseidon, at Medusa. The ancient sources offer several explanations for this, and none of them were entirely satisfying. The most charitable reading is pragmatic. Poseidon was Athena's equal in divine rank. He was an Olympian, one of the 12.
A god who had split the governance of the universe with his two brothers. Retaliating against him directly was simply not possible, or at least it was not something Athena could do without triggering a conflict that would shake the foundations of the divine order. So she did what powerful beings throughout history have done when confronted with a wrong they cannot correct at its source. She turned her rage on the one who was easier to reach. A less charitable reading, and one that several ancient writers at least implied, is that Athena was jealous, that the comparisons people made between Medusa's beauty and her own had already rankled, that the assault in the temple gave her an excuse to do something she had wanted to do for reasons that had nothing to do with justice. And perhaps the darkest reading of all, that Athena did not see what happened to Medusa as a wrong requiring correction, that she saw only the desecration of her temple, the violation of the sacred space itself, and chose to punish the priestess for being present when that desecration occurred. The punishment Athena devised was precise in its cruelty. The beautiful hair, the feature people had traveled to see, the feature that had drawn unwanted attention, the feature that some had dared to compare to Athena's own, was transformed first. It became snakes, living, writhing, venomous serpents that moved and hissed and could not be removed or tamed. The very source of Medusa's celebrated beauty became the most visible symbol of her otherness, her danger, her monstrousness. Then, the eyes. No one is quite sure what Medusa's eyes looked like after the transformation. Ancient sources describe the effect rather than the appearance. Anyone who met her gaze directly was turned to stone. Not killed, not wounded, petrified. Transformed from a living thing into a mineral object, frozen in whatever posture they had been standing in at the moment of contact. The effect was instantaneous and irreversible. An entire landscape of stone figures, human in shape, arrested mid-motion, was the testimony of every warrior who had come to challenge her. She was exiled, sent to the edges of the world. Ancient sources differ on the precise location, but the descriptions cluster around the same idea, somewhere far from human civilization, near the entrance to the underworld, near the far western boundary of the earth where the Hesperides tended their garden of golden apples and the sun descended below the horizon into darkness.
Somewhere beyond the reach of ordinary people. Somewhere that functioned as both a prison and an abandonment. Her sisters went with her. Stheno and Euryale, immortal and unable to be killed, chose exile alongside their mortal sister. They could not protect her. They could not lift the curse. They could only be present. And in a life designed to isolate Medusa completely from everything she had known, that presence must have mattered. The world she lived in. After. Think about what that life looked like. Not in the abstract, not as mythology, but as an existence. Every creature that came near her was in danger. Every traveler who wandered too close and turned an accidental gaze in her direction became a statue. The landscape around her lair was described in ancient sources as a field of stone. Figures frozen in the postures of approach, of challenge, of flight, of surprise. Warriors in full armor, petrified mid-swing. Animals caught in moments of motion, suddenly and permanently still. She could not look at her sisters directly, could not look at her own reflection without risk. The gaze that had been given to her as a punishment was indiscriminate. It did not distinguish between enemies and allies, between those who came to kill her and those who came to mourn with her. It simply acted the way a force of nature acts, without intent or preference. And this is perhaps the most important thing the ancient sources tell us about Medusa's life after the transformation, and the thing most retellings fail to mention. She did not hunt. She did not go in search of victims. The warriors who came to her lair, whose stone forms accumulated around it like a grim garden, came looking for her. They came to kill her, to claim her head, to add a famous monster's defeat to their list of accomplishments. She was not the predator in those encounters. She was the prey. She lived in exile with her immortal sisters, surrounded by the stone record of every attempt on her life, unable to move through the world without catastrophic consequence, aging toward a death that her sisters could never share. And she waited. For what, the ancient sources don't say. Perhaps for nothing. Perhaps for the end that her mortal nature had always made inevitable. Perseus, the hero built by other people's schemes. Perseus was born under circumstances that deserve more attention than they usually receive, because they illuminate exactly what kind of story this is.
His mother was Danae, a princess of Argos. An oracle had told her father, King Acrisius, that his grandson would kill him. In response, with the iron logic of a man who feared prophecy more than he valued his daughter, Acrisius locked Danae in a bronze tower, sealed from the world, where no man could reach her. Zeus reached her anyway. According to the myth, he descended through the roof of her prison as a shower of golden rain. The result was Perseus. The parallel to Medusa's story is not subtle, and it is not accidental. The son who would eventually kill Medusa was himself the product of a divine encounter that his mother had not chosen. Both stories begin with a god exercising power over a woman in a place that was supposed to offer her protection.
The bronze tower was as much a sanctuary as Athena's temple. Neither sanctuary held. Perseus grew up in poverty on the island of Seriphos, where he and his mother had washed ashore after Acrisius, unable to kill his daughter directly, had sealed them in a chest and thrown it into the sea. They survived. Perseus grew into a young man of notable courage, if not notable resources. And then, King Polydectes of Seriphos decided he wanted Danae for himself. Perseus was inconvenient. A young man with nothing to lose and a mother to protect was exactly the kind of obstacle that a calculating king needed to remove. Polydectes found his solution at a banquet where he announced he would be pursuing a different woman and asked each of his guests to contribute a horse to the courtship gift. Perseus, who had no horse, rashly declared he would bring whatever the king wanted, even the head of Medusa. Polydectes knew exactly what he was doing. He had just sent Perseus to his death.
The arsenal of the gods. What it took. What followed was an accumulation of divine assistance so extensive that it raises an uncomfortable question about what heroism actually means. Perseus could not have found Medusa's lair without help. He could not have approached it without being killed. He could not have struck the killing blow without the right weapon. And he could not have escaped with the head without being able to flee faster than anything that flew. Every single element of the task required intervention from a power greater than himself. First, he needed to find her. The location of Medusa's lair was not common knowledge. Ancient sources describe it as genuinely remote, at the edge of the world, beyond any map that existed. To find it, Perseus had to first locate the Graiai, the three ancient Gray sisters, daughters of Phorcys and Ceto, who were therefore Medusa's own aunts. They were described as ancient beyond reckoning, gray from birth, sharing a single eye and a single tooth that they passed between themselves, never all three in possession of sight at the same moment.
Perseus stole the eye. He caught it as one sister passed it to another, held it hostage, and refused to return it until they told him what he needed to know.
The Gray revealed the location of Medusa's lair, and Perseus returned their eye and their ability to see. It is a clever moment in the myth, and a slightly uncomfortable one. The hero's first act was to rob three blind old women of their only means of vision to extract information he could not obtain by any other means. With the location established, the gods began to supply what he needed. Hermes provided winged sandals, the same kind he himself wore, capable of flight, capable of carrying Perseus across the ocean to the far edges of the world in hours rather than months. Hades provided the Helm of Darkness, the same helmet that made the god of the underworld himself invisible, capable of rendering anyone who wore it completely undetectable. From the nymphs, a group of divine intermediaries whose identity varies across different accounts, he received the Pegasus, a special bag or satchel whose divine construction meant that anything placed inside it would not harm the bearer. A necessary precaution, given that the severed head of Medusa was still going to have working eyes. And Athena, the goddess who had cursed Medusa, who had created the very problem Perseus was being sent to solve, gave him a shield of polished bronze, mirrored to a degree that allowed a clear reflection, the solution to the gaze that Athena herself had created. The weapon itself was the harpy,
an adamantine blade with a curved sickle-like edge. The same weapon, some ancient sources claimed, that had been used by Cronus to castrate Uranus at the dawn of time. A blade with history. A blade that had already changed the shape of the cosmos once. With everything assembled, Perseus flew west. What happened in the lair? The ancient sources are careful about the approach. This was not a heroic charge. This was not a warrior striding boldly forward to face his enemy in open combat. Perseus found Medusa sleeping. He navigated toward her by her reflection in the shield's polished surface, keeping his back to her, using the bronze mirror to see without seeing, moving in reverse through the stone-littered landscape of her lair. The stone figures that surrounded him were the testament of every warrior who had tried a different approach. Every man who had come in the daylight had sought a direct confrontation, had believed that courage would be enough. Perseus did not believe that. He moved carefully, he used his tools, he wore his invisibility. And when he was close enough, he struck. One blow. The harp came down and severed her head from her shoulders, and the myth records that Perseus looked away even in that moment, trusting the reflection, not his own eyes, until the thing was done and the head was safely in the cabesus. But the myth does not end there, because the moment of Medusa's death was also a moment of extraordinary birth. From the wound where her neck had been severed, two beings emerged fully formed into the world. The first was Pegasus, the winged horse, white as sea foam, born from the blood of a Gorgon and the divine nature of a sea god. Pegasus would go on to become one of the most beloved creatures in all of Greek mythology, a symbol of poetic inspiration, of the higher reaches of the imagination, later ridden by the hero Bellerophon in his attempt to reach Olympus. The second was Chrysaor, whose name means he of the golden sword, a giant warrior who stepped out of that moment of death already armed. Both were children of Poseidon, conceived during the assault in Athena's temple, carried to term through the impossible biology of myth, born at the moment of their mother's death into a world that had never made room for them while she lived. Life from trauma, creation from destruction. The ancient Greeks embedded this in the story deliberately. In the moment of Medusa's greatest loss, she also gave. She gave Pegasus to the world, and that gift outlasted everything that had been taken from her. The escape and what the head could do. Perseus fled. Stheno and Euryale woke to find their sister dead and her killer already airborne, wearing the helm of darkness, invisible to their sight. Ancient sources describe them as pursuing him across the sky in grief and fury, two immortal Gorgons who could not die and could not catch him. They eventually fell behind. The myth does not dwell on what they returned to. It doesn't have to. The image speaks for itself. Perseus's journey home was not direct. He carried the most powerful weapon in the world in a bag at his hip. A weapon that worked through exposure rather than use, that turned stone anything it looked upon, that required no skill to deploy beyond simply showing it. He encountered Atlas along the way, the great Titan, condemned by Zeus to hold the sky on his shoulders for eternity, met Perseus in the far western reaches of the world. Ancient sources vary on what passed between them. Some suggest Atlas refused Perseus hospitality, others suggest the meeting was more complicated. But the outcome was the same. Perseus drew out Medusa's head and showed it to the Titan. Atlas became the Atlas Mountains, the entire mountain range that runs across what is now North Africa, the mountains that ancient Greeks pointed to and said there is where the sky meets the earth, was, in the mythological imagination, the petrified body of one of the last Titans, a range of mountains born from a single moment of divine gaze. Then came Andromeda. Perseus, flying over the coast of Ethiopia, saw a woman chained to a sea cliff, beautiful, terrified, waiting for something terrible. Her name was Andromeda, and she had been offered as a sacrifice to a sea monster called Cetus, sent by Poseidon, whose name appears again in this story, as it so often does. to punish her mother Cassiopeia for the crime of claiming her daughter was more beautiful than the sea nymphs. Beauty, again, as the origin of catastrophe. The myth keeps returning to this theme. Perseus killed the sea monster by showing it Medusa's head. One look, and Cetus became a reef of stone somewhere beneath the Ethiopian Sea. He freed Andromeda, married her, and continued toward home.
The final use of the head was the most satisfying in the ancient moral arithmetic of the myth. King Polydectes, the man who had sent Perseus on this mission specifically so he could pursue Danae in her son's absence, was holding court when Perseus arrived. The king had assumed Perseus was dead. He was wrong. Perseus walked into that throne room, reached into the cabesus, and showed the king and his entire court what he had brought back from the edge of the world. Every person in that room became stone. The man who had weaponized Perseus's love for his mother against him ended up as a monument to his own miscalculation.
The Gorgoneon, how death became protection. Perseus eventually gave the head to Athena, the goddess who had cursed Medusa, the goddess whose temple had been violated and whose priestess had been punished for that violation. The goddess who had handed Perseus the tools to do what she herself, for whatever reason, had chosen not to do. Athena mounted the head on her aegis. The aegis is difficult to translate simply. It was a divine object that functioned as both a shield and a breastplate, a piece of armor that carried the authority of divinity itself, that could inspire terror in enemies and protection for allies. It was one of the defining symbols of Athena's power. And now, at its center, looking outward at whoever approached, was the face of Medusa. The face that turned people to stone, mounted on the armor of the goddess who had created it, carried into battle as a weapon, displayed on the facades of temples as a protector, stamped on coins, carved above doorways, engraved on shields, worn as amulets by soldiers and sailors and travelers and mothers protecting their homes. The ancient Greeks had a word for objects designed to ward off evil, apotropaic. From the Greek apotropeos, that which turns away. An apotropaic symbol was something placed at the boundary between the safe and the dangerous, something meant to make whatever harm was approaching think twice about crossing that line. And the most powerful apotropaic symbol in the ancient Greek world was the face of Medusa. The Gorgoneon, the image of Medusa's face, wide-eyed, sometimes shown with tusks, surrounded by serpents, appeared everywhere in the ancient world. On Athena's helmet in classical sculpture, on the breastplate of Alexander the Great when he marched across the known world, on the coins of Greek city-states from Sicily to Asia Minor, on the prows of warships, above the doors of private homes, placed in graves to protect the dead, carried by soldiers who believed the face would stop a spear or an arrow or an enemy's nerve.
The thing that destroys becomes the thing that protects. In death, Medusa became exactly what Athena's temple was supposed to be for her when she ran there seeking sanctuary from Poseidon. She became a shield. The irony is so complete, so structurally perfect, that it seems impossible it was not intentional, that the ancient Greeks who told and retold this story did not feel the weight of it pressing against the edges of every telling. The reach of the Gorgoneon across the ancient world. The image of Medusa did not stay in Greece. It traveled, it changed, it adapted to every culture that encountered it, absorbing new meanings while retaining its core function as a face that confronted the viewer with something they could not easily look away from. Roman temples adopted the Gorgoneon enthusiastically. The Romans, who inherited Greek mythology wholesale and renamed its figures while preserving their stories, found in Medusa a symbol that fits seamlessly into their own martial culture, a face that said, "This place is protected, this boundary is dangerous, turn away now while you still can."
Roman mosaics from across the empire, from Britain to North Africa to the borders of Mesopotamia,
show the Gorgon's face staring up from floors and walls, eyes wide, expression caught in that strange ambiguity between rage and sorrow that the best ancient sculptors managed to capture. In Asia Minor, versions of the Gorgoneon merged with local protective deities. In Egypt, where Alexander the Great wore the image into battle, and whose Hellenistic period saw Greek and Egyptian religious traditions intertwine, the face of Medusa appeared in combinations that would have startled a classical Greek worshipper of Athena. And the image survived the fall of the ancient world entirely. Through the medieval period, through the Renaissance, through the Baroque, and into modernity, the face of Medusa never disappeared. It transformed. It accumulated new meanings, but it never went away.
What does it mean that this image survived? That of all the symbols the ancient world produced, this one, the face of a woman who was assaulted in a holy place, punished by the goddess she served, hunted and killed by a hero equipped with divine weapons, this image became a symbol of protection? That armies carried it into battle, that mothers hung it above cradles. The ancient world understood something about Medusa that it never quite articulated directly. It understood that the face of something that has survived the worst is also the face of something that can protect you from it.
And whose face, in the end, became one of the most enduring images the human world has ever produced. That is not a monster's legacy. That is something far more complicated, far more human, and far more true.